Hi there, this is Michael Becker, and welcome to this session as we dig into and learn about the personal data and identity marketplace. With me today is Liz Brandt, the CEO and founder of Ctrl-Shift, a agency consultancy that has been actively looking in this marketplace for nearly 2 decades, and arguably one of the preeminent thought leaders worldwide as we look into the current and future state of the personal data and identity marketplace. So Liz, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me.
Michael, thank you very much. And what an introduction. I've got a lot to live up to, it seems.
All right. So I have 3 questions for you, and let's dig in and see where we go. And let me ask all 3 questions first, and then we'll kind of go at them one by one, because I think you might find there's some independent and interrelated elements that might come from your responses. So the first question I ask you is, what is the personal data and identity marketplace? And the subset question to that is, what direction is it going? Are we going to continue going down the path of what we'll call the current market model, where personal data is primarily being under control of private sector organizations and regulated by public? Or are we going to go down the self-sovereign identity model, where people have some utopian state of complete sovereignty and agency over their data? Or are we going to find some middle ground in the marketplace? What I often refer to, as you and I've talked about before, what I call the identity nexus, that equilibrium point of the flows of data. So kind of what is that market? Where are we? Where are we going? That's question number 1. Once we understand this market, the next question is, what do we need to truly know? And when I say we, I mean the 3 primary actors of industry, namely the people, aka the data subject, public institutions, and private institutions. What do they need to know to then answer the last and final question? It is, now what do they need to do? What do we need to do? What do we individual data subjects need to be doing, and how do we prioritize steps? What do private and public institutions need to start doing to ultimately, shepherd us into whatever future we choose to have? So within that context and that background, let me ask you the question. What is the personal data and identity marketplace?
I think there's one word that actually spans all 3, which is value. It is the core of the value in our digital economy moving forward. Personal information and identity will be the absolute lifeblood and nervous system of every piece of digital service that's delivered to you and I, and enables from there businesses to work effectively and efficiently. So the trouble is, it sounds so huge, and it is huge, and that's why 20 yeyears on, it's not quite 20 years, Michael. I'm not that old yet.
I think I said nearly 20, but yeah, okay.
Yeah. Definitely past 1 decade. Yeah. So it is absolutely enormous. Now, what the question then is, where do you start? Because when it's that big, where do you start? Because personal data touches every part of our lives. It touches every part of business, and it touches, and that it means everything that you do with a business has personal data embedded in it. And I think the thing that we see at the moment is that there's a massive failure point in 2 massive failure points in the value creation. One is that the data isn't available to use in the hands of the individual. And when I say in the hands of the individual, I'm not planning on individuals actually being able to manage the data itself. But for them to be able to manage their lives more effectively, there has to be the availability of data. So right now, we're all quite used to businesses being really efficient because they've got loads of data to work out, what your top line is, what your bottom line is. We hope we understand that. Where the risks are in our business, what's going on the other side of the planet. Data flows through our businesses, and if we're really good, it flows really well and sits inside business processes. We kind of spent quite a long time working out how to do that, and now we're pretty good at it. And what that actually is doing in all of our digital transformations is making the business really, really efficient and pushing that out to the consumer. Yeah. And that's great. Apart from then, the consumer has no tools to then take it forward. So I'd love to talk to and understand what people do on their Sunday, but I think an awful lot of people are being like the warm body integration unit, if you want to call it that, yeah, where they're taking the stuff that so efficiently gets pushed out of the businesses to the individual and trying to make it work in their lives, yeah. maybe passing it to another supplier, maybe then trying to modify the data and pass it back to their supplier. You know, what was it yesterday? I was underneath the flipping stairs taking a photograph of my of my electricity meter. I mean, what is that about? You know, they're being really efficient. They've become really efficient. They just take a photograph. There's me in the dark with the torch, you know, taking a photograph. What is that? That is crazy, huh? Mm-hmm. So that's the first failure point. We've become this kind of soft and warm body integration between businesses, or within businesses' digital transformation. Yeah. And then the second failure point is this fact that we cannot create the value in our lives because we can't get to the data to enable us to do that. So let's say I want to make a decision about, I mean, simple stuff in some ways, like about a car. You know, what do I want to buy? When do I want to buy it? Do I want to buy a car? You know, and when should I buy a car? Is it electric? Is it not electric? Do I actually do a share? What do I do? How do I manage that? And if I do an electric car, what do I do about the electricity? Do I have to change my electricity? There's decisions to be made and all of that. And that's all data. Yeah, all of that.
No, that's all data. But how, in the context of personal data and identity, you know, how do you see, an individual benefiting from having more control over their personal identity within that context? So, you know, me knowing more about myself and my identity and being in control of those things, how would that help me in the car buying process?
Well, so I mean, car buying is really simple, but the fact is, I can actually, if I've got my own identity, yeah, and the self, in this instance, when I say own identity, I mean a self-sovereign identity, which then you can lock your data in around it. Then that becomes verifiable as me, that data. But also, I can know that data is mine, and other people can know that's my data. That data that can then be used by me to maybe work out what I want to do, but also I can make that available to other organizations so they can work out how best to serve me. So if those digital identity enables us to bolt together the data and then make that verifiable data so that people can then use it. So they're two really bond together.
And then that's the identity piece. And I think the other part of the authentic part, data part of this discussion too, is if I truly could be mapping, for example, all of my location history, where I've actually driven, how often I've actually driven, the maintenance records of that car. So if I'm actually looking to go buy a car in the future, I actually have real data to be making that decision. I'm not guessing how many miles I drive. I may only really legitimately need half the car I think I need, right?
Well,
to be able to achieve the efficient goal I want, but we don't have that data.
Exactly, and they may well just say, the data may well just say, buy a bike and hire a car, or leave, basically. Yeah. So it enables you to make better decisions, and better decisions potentially based on what your preferences are, i.e. my preference might be to reduce my carbon footprint, or my preference might be pink, or whatever my preference might be. My preference is not pink, by the way, just so that you know. So, we can actually bolt our own preferences as data into that, which enables us to then find wholly new paths to a decision. So, and I think the thing, it enables us to use that data from those environments to then make better decisions. Like you say, the data comes out of the car, the data comes out of the home. Where else can the data come out of? It comes out of your watch, comes out of your phone, of course, your browsing history, but it comes out of everywhere, and it will come out of more and more and more as we get smart homes, we get smart cars, we get smart life, basically. Yeah. It's going to be.
So I loved what you said. Data is value, and that actually, a subset question that I want to ask you is like, for a lot of businesses and a lot of people and governments, when we look at, a market, and there is in fact a market, companies and industry are buying and selling and creating value from data. I think we can agree on that. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Depending on, the question is then, well, then how do we size the opportunity? How do we size the market? And let me throw some numbers at you, and maybe you can give me some of the way you calculate it as well. So I've been doing some research, and for example, in the United States, there is a thriving third-party data broker market. Companies buying and selling personal data, and there's about 4,000 of them. And one would argue in today's 2021 numbers, the market could be valued about 238 billion, potentially by about 400 billion by 2025. But that's just looking at data as an asset that's being sold, the individual pieces of data, my name, my preferences, and such. So that's actually a very small conservative number of data as an economic asset being brokered and sold in one small market. The other flip side of that is looking at data as value, as you put out. What value can we create from the efficient production and use of data? And some of the analysis I've looked is if you just look at the GAFAM companies, Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft, at the end of 2020, they were valued at about $7.4 trillion. One could argue that about 50% of their value is actually derived from personal data and identity services. At which point then that would then roughly put the value generated from those 5 companies alone in the tune of about $3.5+ trillion. So you're looking at a huge opportunity, and from a market, either just general old economy selling of a product model to value generation model. Would you kind of agree with that calculus, or how else might you go estimating the size of this opportunity, or is that just
and hey, Michael, we've worked with economists on trying to size this opportunity, and when we did our piece of work on the economic opportunity for data portability in the UK, where individuals have a right to access their data and the data then flows more effectively across the economy, the economists were only able to actually value the size of the productivity and efficiency that creates inside businesses. You can measure that, and that's 28.7 billion in the UK. They could not get anywhere near measuring.
So let me pause you right there, though. This is a really important point. Really important. So for the UK government, the society that is the UK, they've estimated just by enabling data portability, like you and I were discussing before, and the ability for people to be able to access their information and then use it, just the efficiencies of that will add 28.7 billion pounds to the annual UK GDP.
Completely.
Every year, and growing. That does not take into account innovation, new experiences, entrepreneurial growth, new business models, and all of the other things that could be coming out of that.
No, okay. Think about this. Okay, think about if you can use your data. Yeah, if somebody on your behalf can help you to gather, orchestrate, and analyze your data, you can work out 6 to 8 months. We've done work in this area. 6 to 8 months before a mental health episode, that you are heading into a place which is not mentally sound. Yeah, so you're starting to erode your mental stability.
Yes,
and you can take very simple steps to nudge away from a mental health episode. And what that saves in an economy and in a society and in individuals' lives and suffering is incalculable, actually. And so you've got these enormous opportunities, and you can do it. So we've worked on this. Basically, if you take 3 data points, your financial data, so how is your finance, your sleep data, and interestingly, not so much, you can go for your activity data, that's very useful, but your contact data, how many people are you talking to? Yeah? Those 3 will give you a very sound indicator of your mental well-being. And if those start to go out of kilter, you can start to take action to change that pathway to actually move away from that mental health episode. How do you measure the value of that? How do you measure the value of human suffering, of hitting a mental health episode, which sometimes takes the rest of somebody's life to get out of? Yeah? And not just somebody's human suffering.
Are incalculable.
How do you measure the GDP impact of that individual then not becoming a valid economic unit? Yeah.
Yeah.
This is, as you say, it's incalculable. And that's just one example. That is just one example. And if you take that one example and then you say, okay, so let's just say Liz keeps going and she's still not sleeping well and she's still not communicating with people and she's still running into financial difficulty and she's getting into a really bad place. You can take the data from Liz's life and you can work out through a triage system who best can help Liz. It might not be that I go to my GP. It might not be that I go to a therapist. It might be that I go to a money management company. Yeah? to get my finances fixed.
You know, interesting. That brings to mind to a story I just read the other day where I believe it was Cambodia, where they were trying to help the country use antidepressant medication and to help people with depression. And the medical staff just didn't understand. They're like, you know, what are these medications going to do and such. And long story short, when they asked, you know, they said, "Oh yeah, we've got that. We've got prescriptions for helping with depression." And they're like, "Well, give us an example." Well, there was a farmer who stepped on a mine and blew up his leg in the rice field. And then once he recovered, he went back to the rice field, and for months he was crying and under tremendous amounts of stress and not doing well. And the traditional approach would be to give him medication. What they did is they sat down and talked to him and said, "Well, okay, what's happening is your environment. You're freaking out having to go back to this rice field every day where you were injured." And so our prescription to him is we gave him a cow, and he became a cow farmer and changed his environment, changed his context, and facilitated the conversation, the connections with people. And now his depression's gone, and now he's happy and healthy, and he's not on medication.
So I suggest everybody goes away and thinks about everything in their lives that get impacted by contextual activities, and then works out what the value of this personal data market is.
So, but Liz, I think that's absolutely fantastic where we're at, and those conclusions that, you know, frankly, what we need to do is learn how to contextualize the state of personal data within any given moment. And we need to do that from the lens of a consumer, from a business, aka the business on how to support somebody, and from an industry and public sectors on how we help people in the industry and people do that. I really appreciate your insights on this, and I hope we can do it again.
Fantastic, Michael. Nice to speak to you, and I hope we can do it again too.